You can just join us a little bit late. So I do see from our participants that most of you guys are already CARP scholars, so it's wonderful to see you all again. Looks like we have a couple of guests, and I'm sure you might have been told a little bit about what CARP is, but if you don't know, CARP, of course, is the Climate Adaptation Research Program, which is a program that started in late 2022 or early 2023. That's managed here at the University of Arizona in collaboration with Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And our goal is to support early career scholars to do research on climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction in their local areas in Africa. And at the moment, we have 33 research projects that we're supporting across 10 different countries in Africa. And these are at universities that are part of the Peri-Peri-U network. And if anyone would like a bit more information on that, I can send a link. But we fund these projects as well as provide technical support and capacity building activities like these webinars. There's the Peri-Peri-U logo. And yeah, maybe we could share the CARP website link in the chat as well. But we do welcome everyone, whether you're a CARP scholar or guest. And yeah, thanks, Kari. I see you shared the Peri-Peri-U link as well. But yeah, it's wonderful to see you all. Again, we met some of you guys at our workshop in Tanzania last year, so it's good to see your names. And we also have an upcoming workshop in Ethiopia in May. So we'll see some of you there as well. But today our webinar is, of course, focused on social media. And we're very lucky to have Tamutswa Mahari with us today. And Tamutswa is actually from Zimbabwe. So she's my neighbor in Southern Africa. But she is based here in Arizona with us, where she's doing her PhD in communications. Tamu also works on the CARP program as a communications assistant. And some of her tasks involve implementing our communication strategy, including our social media, to ensure that we are getting the word out about CARP and disseminating the work that we do. But other than CARP, Tamutswa's research aims to contribute to both the theoretical understanding and practical application of intercultural communication, specifically within organizational settings. And she does this by identifying the mechanisms through which cultural differences impact organizing processes. So Tamutswa has a lot to share with us today. And with that, I'll pass over to her. Thank you, Tamu.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that introduction. I think at that point, I can truly skip my little introduction slide here. I think one thing I'll add to that is that I've had experience creating content for both universities, non-governmental organizations, as well as traditional, non-traditional companies as well. So I'm hoping I can bring a perspective that will be valuable to everyone, no matter what field you're in, what stage of your career you're in, what you hope to share or how you hope to use social media. So I'm really excited to share with you. And if at any point anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm also very open to just unmuting yourself and saying hello. Quick note, I'm sure we won't speak over each other, but just for everyone to be aware that I hope to make it as engaging as possible. All right. So for our first 60 minutes, my primary goals for us is to help identify the right platforms for your research, and to work through mastering the art of crafting compelling messages and think about how to engage effectively with audiences as well, no matter what the platform is, and what your goal may be with using social media. And also thinking about how to measure and maximize your social media impact. I'll make sure not to get too technical, but I hope to leave some valuable tidbits that will at least be seeds for thinking about how you engage with social media and becoming a little more thoughtful is the wrong word, but more intentional about how we're using social media as researchers. And then in our last 30 minutes, considering most of us are COP scholars here, I'll have us take a moment from COP scholars and just chat a little bit. So before we get started into all the content and all the information, I wanted us just to kickstart with a poll and check in to see which social media platforms people use most often. And in thinking about this, you can even think about it beyond just the professional space as well. Which social media platforms do you open the most? Which ones do you spend the most time on? Um, and we have Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok. If you have other social media platforms that you are actively using, um, feel free to pop them in the chat so we can have those in mind to speak on and discuss. And I'll take a few seconds here. I see we have 9 answers so far, so a few more responses coming in. I think about 11 more. Oh, 9. Okay. WhatsApp is in the lead here. I'll let about 5 more seconds go before I end the poll here. All right. Okay. We have a good mix of use of social media at the moment. WhatsApp is definitely at the top, at the front here. Facebook especially, which is good to see. I see LinkedIn and Twitter as well. Instagram and TikTok. I think we have a good variety of people on different social media platforms. So hopefully something is valuable to someone as I share the content. All right. I want us all to keep in mind which social media platforms we've identified here, just because the follow-up will be informed by what we've said here and what we've marked as the social media platforms we use. But it's a good way for us just to gauge where everyone is in terms of social media use at the moment. Right. All right. I'm just going to close that. All right. So the reason why I did this poll, I started off with this poll, is because I want us to start thinking about what social media platforms we're using, as well as other social media platforms that we could potentially be using as well. So think about which ones you may not have marked off, and see what the uses for those are in terms of us as a group right now, and how we could potentially move into different spaces and social media platforms. Great. Moving on to the next slide. One thing that I found very valuable to share is thinking about how people are using social media, particularly in professional workspaces. Um, and it may seem like a small number, but about 37.6% of all internet users worldwide use social media for work purposes to some extent, whether it's to bridge gaps between academia and the global community, amplifying their own voices from their expertise, creating connections, or looking for opportunities as well. But for the purposes of this webinar, we'll be focusing mainly on LinkedIn and X because we as CARP are currently using those platforms. and maximizing our time on those. But a lot of the information that I'll share can be extended beyond just LinkedIn and X. So that's something important to keep in mind. On that note, with keeping with statistics, I wanted to share a few stats that are currently out there, and these are from Forbes that look at how people are using research, specifically, I mean, social media, for research particularly. And currently in the US, 80% of scholars use social media for professional networking. And I think that can go beyond just scholars as well. A lot of professionals are using platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, to really leverage the opportunity to create professional networks. And over 60% of academics share their research on social media, which helps increase their work's visibility and impact. And it's also important to note that social media posts can increase your article citations by over up to 70%. So social media isn't just about catching up on the latest gossip or um, just throwing information out into the abyss. There's actual valuable outcomes that come out of engaging on social media and sharing what you have and what you know with the world. So, in thinking about how social media can be powerful for research, I created a table that I hope can almost be a checkpoint for us as researchers to keep in mind what we are doing and how we are sharing information and what that can do for us. So, in thinking about what purpose we have for sharing content on social media, I'm hoping this table can help keep almost as a checklist or rather as a point of, okay, I'm keeping in mind what platform am I using and what is my goal. So I've just created a little bit of a quick table with a row on storytelling, resource sharing, disseminating research, and networking, and kind of split it between the different platforms. Obviously, this is not the exhaustive list. There's so much more you can add here. But in thinking about whether you are aiming to tell a story, this table kind of gives a general idea of which platforms are best suited for that. So whether you are sharing a narrative about something that happened or you're kind of telling the story of your research, this is a good list of those platforms that could be beneficial for that. And in thinking about resource sharing, and this goes beyond just sharing either PDF of a research paper and things like that. But even in sharing resources that will be beneficial for either yourself or your peers or people in the general community, I've also just kind of marked that off by platform and disseminating research, of course, that is sharing a research paper, sharing bullet points of your research, or even sharing infographics as well. This is a good check mark of what platforms are best suited for that. And with networking, this is everything that involves being able to comment on content, being able to build your network as well. This is a general checklist of how you can keep in mind what platform am I using, what it is doing for me, and how can I make sure that the goals that I have for sharing information or using social media align with the platform that I'm using. And I think this is a very not limited, but rather a very quick list. And you, as a researcher and a user of social media, can always negotiate what the platform is doing for you, and potentially find ways to network on things like blogging platforms or even on ResearchGate and academia.edu. Um, but as a general consensus, this is a good checkpoint for keeping in mind what each social media platform can kind of do for you. So, in thinking about what social media platforms can do for you and how we can use them, I want us to go back to what we put in the poll responses for my first question and kind of carry that on forward and think about what our primary uses for social media are. And I believe we should be able to select all that apply. I'm curious to see how social media is serving people at the moment. Okay. So we have a few answer choices here. Um, and it can be as simple as using social media to connect with friends and family, sharing updates about personal life, um, as a source of information, local news, international news, for networking purposes, sharing and discovering new research, or participating in dialogue discussions, keeping updated on what events are happening, or identifying funding or job opportunities. And if there's other ways people are using, I'm happy to look over in the chat and see what people are saying there. Okay, this is great. I think one that I definitely expected, just because social media is such a good place for it, is connecting with friends and family, right? Um, it's a really great way to stay connected and keep in touch. And I'm happy to see that there's a good mix of responses across the board, and that people are finding value with using social media for so many reasons. Awesome. All right. About 2 more seconds and I'll end the poll here. Okay, lovely. There's a good amount of variation in how people are using social media at the moment. And I think even in thinking about this, we can start to propel from this with what I will share later on in the slide. Okay. I'm curious to hear how people who've identified other ways for social media use, if anyone would like to pop anything into the comments, unmute themselves very quickly. Not to put anyone on the spot, of course. Right. That will remain a mystery for now, but if anyone pops that into the chat, I will be keeping an eye on that. Great stuff. So let's get into the thick of it. If I'm getting too technical at any point, feel free to stop me. Sometimes I forget how immersed I am in the social media world and want to make the information as accessible as possible to all of us and meet everyone where they're at. All right. So I want to start us off with thinking about how we're creating content and the content we're creating, and a few information and questions that I want us to all keep in mind when thinking about content creation. Um, Firstly is what content will I share, right? A great way to think about that is identify content that you already have, whether you have visuals that can be pictures, slides, infographics, text, obviously research papers. Do you have any audio that could potentially be a valuable source of content? And thinking about what content you already have, you can proceed by to identify the most appropriate platform for that content specifically. A good rule of thumb could be using that table that I shared earlier. And another thing that's really important is who are you trying to reach? And I think I'll spend a lot more time on that, particularly, especially thinking about the fact that a lot of us are already using social media platforms. Um, and there's a good mix of people on different social media platforms. I think I'll spend more time thinking about who are you trying to reach and what are you trying to say? Like, what are you trying to share? And who do you hope to see the information that you're sharing? And in thinking about that, I'll actually jump to that and speak a little bit about how we can better understand our audiences and who we are engaging with on social media. So, this visual actually came out of a research paper um, by organizational communication scholars, communication mass media communication scholars, who are looking at how conservation researchers are using social media platforms and how they can best create um, a more effective, I guess, message for their specific goal. So, in thinking about how we as researchers can share content on social media, there's two ways that our content can kind of go and almost fall into the World Wide Web in particular. So, the first way is in reach, which is, in other words, reaching to the choir. And this involves engaging more with your peers. And this is mainly when we're thinking about strengthening connections within our existing professional communities. And it involves engaging with fellow scientists, fellow researchers, academic peers, and organizations that are already aware of and invested in, for our case, disaster risk reduction, right? Um, and there are so many benefits to having an in-reach perspective to using social media, right? It gives us an opportunity to create collaborative environments, share and learn insights, and build upon our existing knowledge. So either fortifying the research that we do through support from people who are like-minded in the same field, same industry. So in thinking about in-reach platform, you can think of places like LinkedIn or ResearchGate, where you have the opportunity to engage in more in-depth and in deep, enriching discussions, and can be a little more detailed about the findings that you share, be more technical in the language you use because you know your audience already uses this terminology and speaks the language that you speak, um, both academically, scientifically, professionally. And a lot of us may already spend time within the in-reach space, mainly because of how networks work on a lot of our social media platforms, right? We connect with people who either are on this in the same industry as us or with community leaders and organizations that help us learn more about the spaces that we are in. But on the other side of that is outreach, where we are singing from the rooftops. And outreach, for the most part, in some situations, can broaden your horizons. And this goes beyond just looking at our general networks, looking at people who are in the same um, positions as us in the same industry and things like that. And it involves reaching out to general public, journalists, educators, and even as far as decision makers and policy makers, right? So that is how you can kind of think about what outreach is. And the value, or rather the essential components of outreach are um, that it gives us the opportunity to find um, either funding, to share our message beyond just our network, and almost to a certain extent affirm or kind of solidify the real world impacts that your research can have beyond just the networks that we create with like minded individuals, people doing the same work as us. So outreach is one that I will spend a lot of time thinking about for this presentation and thinking about how we can really find value in going beyond our in reach to share information, even if we believe that the general public may not be interested. There's ways that we can definitely maneuver and negotiate our information and content to make it more valuable. Obviously, it already is, but that's something to keep in mind. So, um, I hope I haven't gone too into the weeds of social media and media jargon. I'm hoping that this visual kind of gives a good starting point for thinking about how am I using social media right now? What are my goals? Am I trying to just build my networks? Am I trying to get this information out to the general public or get noticed by particular organizations and things like that? And so I wanted to share a few examples of how different organizations, different people are using social media at the moment to do things like disseminating research. And these are only just a few examples. And I think we can start to work through how this mirrors things we may be doing right now or could influence the changes that we make, the way that we're sharing research at the moment. Right. So these are just a few screen grabs. You can see that they're all from different time points. And these are looking particularly at Twitter specifically. One thing that's really valuable about using platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, is that you have an opportunity to share links to your actual content and your actual information and direct people to places, whether it's your personal or professional blog pages or to research papers that may have been published. Um, and one thing I will note in this especially is as we were looking for content to share, one thing that would be valuable for all of us to keep in mind is to think about how we are either captioning or introducing things like our links, resources, and content that we might share. In this situation, something like search engine optimization really helps in thinking about how we create content, right? So think about the words that are typically used within your specific field in your specific communities, whether it's academic or professional communities, and think about whether you're using those in your posts and how they will be beneficial in things like searchability. And when people are looking for information and content, will you pop up easily? And we'll spend time looking at like hashtags and tagging as well in more detail. So segueing off these Twitter posts, I wanted us to look at different content creation strategies that can be beneficial and for us to keep in mind when we're actually creating posts, thinking about who we're sending messages to, um, who our information is going to, and things like that. So I've put this in brief bullet points, mainly for us to keep in mind and be um, checkpoints for us. And the first one is thinking about crafting engaging and informative content. So, for the most part, the key to social media success lies in the quality of your content. Sometimes it can be a fluke. Sometimes something goes viral just because people have picked it up. But for the most part, the quality of the content really, really plays a role in how um, successful your information will be. So, for instance, for us, when we're discussing things like disaster risk reduction, um, think about the ways that we are framing the information. Are we highlighting practical applications, prevention strategies that will be valuable for people? Are we sharing case studies that people can either relate to or use to segue into understanding the content that you have, right? So, in thinking about how we're creating and crafting engagement, informative content, it's important to keep these strategies in mind. I'll also note again that using relatable language and avoiding jargon um, many times is a really, really valuable way of making sure that your information is accessible. So think about how we can make complex concepts more accessible to the layman and to the general public as well. Another thing that's really beneficial and valuable to think about in creating content is how are you using visuals and multimedia to enhance your messages? Us as humans are very visual creatures, so the use of visuals and multimedia can significantly amplify and impact your message as well. This can be as simple as a diagram. It doesn't have to be a National Geographic level image, or even things like emoticons in your message, so emojis as well, to kind of play or serve as landmarks for things um, in your content as well, and helps break it up as well. Um, or even things like a short clip, a video, or GIFs, graphics, and pictures. The right visual can help transcend beyond technical knowledge, language barriers as well, particularly when we're working in such international spaces. Um, so keep that in mind and thinking about what visuals you have. It can be as simple as just a picture of a landscape as well, and how you can use that to build a narrative around. Another thing is tools and resources for content creation. Um, the great thing about the internet now is we don't have to be graphic designers to create something visually appealing. So using platforms like Canva for designing graphics or PictoChart for infographics or Lumen 5 for transforming articles into engaging videos, and how we can use our PowerPoint slides as well, like to transform the information that we have into something that can be easily digested for people. I won't go into things like scheduling tools, mainly because I think, especially on a personal level, going into more technical or um, all of those social media management platforms isn't really that necessary. But there are a lot of resources that I'm happy to share with the group as to how we can best use the tools available to us on the internet to create content as well. So getting more into detail, like I'd mentioned earlier on in the webinar, we are focusing mainly on Twitter and LinkedIn, rather X and LinkedIn, and thinking about how we can tailor your messages and information for those specific platforms. And I've kind of created um, a key list or rather a checklist of ways to think about what the social media content we're sharing on each platform can look like and the things to keep in mind. So, in thinking about how we are using Twitter, um, of course, Twitter slash X rather, I should put that in there. I always forget to make that switch. Is a platform of, for the most part, immediacy, and a lot of the content is very, very hashtag driven. And on this platform, you're engaging in very succinct communication, right? You're limited to 280 characters, so you have to make um, every single word, every single letter count for Twitter. And on Twitter, the great thing about Twitter is your audience ranges from fellow researchers to interested public and policy influencers, right? A lot of people on Twitter um, go beyond just their known networks or their personal networks and are looking over at interests as well, looking through keywords to decide who to follow, whose content to engage with, and thinking about all those things when we're creating content for Twitter is really, really important. So, like I said, brevity is especially essential for Twitter. One thing as well is hashtag utilization. I'll spend a little more time later on in the webinar speaking about that, right? Incorporating relevant hashtags to tap into wider conversations. Thinking about things like live tweeting as well, whether we're at particular events or we are in particular situations. How can we leverage tweeting on the ground in the moment to share the most valuable information with our audiences? And Twitter is also a great place to really leverage the visual part of the information that we have to share, mainly because visuals boost engagement um, with posts and things like that. People are clicking on images, graphs, they're watching short videos. And it also gives the opportunity to link to longer content as well. So that's a great way to think about your Twitter posts. They can serve as captions to longer form content, blog posts as well, and things like that. And next, we have LinkedIn, right, which is obviously the professional networking giant. And from our poll in the start, it was clear that a lot of us are already on LinkedIn. We already have either profiles, and we spend time using that. So on LinkedIn, your messages can thankfully afford more detail than X. And you can think about targeting professional people in your spaces professionally, expertise wise. As also an opportunity to reach and connect with industry experts, sorry, and find potential collaborations and opportunities for either career development or research development as well. So LinkedIn offers opportunity for in-depth sharing, right? Firstly, there's no word limit. So you can get as long as you want to get with your posts, although I recommend always try to lean towards shorter posts than longer when it comes to social media posts on whatever platform. Um, LinkedIn is also a great platform to highlight your awards, publications, and project milestones. Obviously, for professional development, it's great to keep yourself out there in terms of what you're sharing about your progress, your work. It's a good way for potential funders to have almost a track record of the work that you've been doing as well. So even if it's something as little as, oh, today I made a milestone with my research, it may not seem as big as, oh, I got a new job, but all of those things incrementally create your brand identity as a professional, as a researcher, as an academic, as a scholar, right? It also gives great opportunity to create industry relevance. So any moment you've ever thought about either commenting on content from fellow researchers, from fellow organizations, whether it's something as short as I found this interesting because it's a great opportunity to do that because you start to build your identity and get yourself out there as an academic. So beyond just the work that we do, whether it's writing papers and everything else, just keeping yourself out there and creating some level of relevance or just having yourself out there so people know that you are within those spaces. LinkedIn offers a good opportunity for that. Obviously, professional development, that may be the foundational purpose of LinkedIn as well. Whether it's sharing career or field growth opportunities or finding those, LinkedIn is the perfect place to do that. And of course, network building, using LinkedIn to create connections with people within your field, beyond your field, helps establish your authority, quote unquote, and foster potential collaborations. I had an inkling feeling that a lot of us would also use Facebook. So I included a bit on that in thinking about how we are using Facebook and the value of it, right? Um, it may be overtaken by the new kids in town, social media, but there's still so much value in um, sharing stories that humanize your research on Facebook, right? It gives the opportunity to have that personal touch as well. Um, and in thinking about Facebook, just because it goes beyond professional spaces and things like that, it's important to keep in mind how we are crafting our messages. So always try to avoid jargon or at least explain complex concepts when we're using Facebook. Um, it may have the same layout, same feel as LinkedIn to a certain extent, but they're very different in that way, right? You can get away with using jargon on LinkedIn and being a little more technical than you would be on Facebook, right? Um, Facebook also offers a really great opportunity to create and join groups for focused topics in our situation, disaster risk reduction. So think about how we're using that to our advantage. What communities are we a part of? What Facebook groups are we joining? Because they can potentially share resources with us or be an opportunity for us to find collaborators and things like that that go beyond our general networks. There's also the opportunity to use diverse multimedia. So you can leverage things like videos. Obviously, Facebook Live is a really great resource as well, whether we're recording workshops, conferences, meetings. And one thing that I like about Facebook that is still an advantage beyond all the other new platforms that have emerged is that you can still create photo albums that kind of help create a narrative for whatever you decide to share and whatever story you're trying to tell. So I would definitely suggest, or at least affirm, that using Facebook is still a great strategy. And beyond our personal communities, we can use them to nurture professional communities, spark dialogue, um, and most importantly, educate people who may not be in our field and in our spaces and reach them through that way. And like I said early on, if anyone has any questions or would like to stop me at any point, feel free to do that. I want us to have the opportunity to do that as a group. So I'm going to circle back on something that I spoke about earlier and said would come up again. And I've titled this section kind of amplifying your message. So thinking about how we're taking a blowhorn to the words that we're saying to get it out there, whether to general audiences or to experts, or I don't know, you might be trying to get the attention of a specific organization. And in thinking about that, I want us to think about how we can harness the power of things like hashtags, um, maximize the collaborations that we have already and partnerships, and how we can most effectively use tagging to amplify our message. So the first thing I'll speak on is the hashtag phenomenon. So for the most part, um, all of us are familiar or at least have seen hashtags in use. And I want us to consider hashtags as sort of beacons in kind of signaling to the world the topics that we are passionate about, and the conversations we're a part of. Um, but it's not just about using any hashtag. It's about thinking about the right hashtag. So typically, the first way that I suggest people using social media should think about hashtags. Um, and you could even do this as like a side thing, either in your notes or just even on paper to keep in mind. Think about the hashtags that are prevalent in either the communities that you work in, or that are valuable to the organizations that you follow or want to get the attention of, right? Um, I think one that many of us have seen, or at least have used in some situations, is things like USAID saves lives, right? Or DRR, or putting things like hashtag climate change into your either posts or your profile, which is a great thing that social media has shifted now. You have the opportunity to even put hashtags in your profile to kind of indicate where you fall or the interest that you have. So my first suggestion is create that almost database for yourself and think about the hashtags that are valuable or being more frequently used. And the reason why I say that is because beyond just creating a hashtag, using hashtags that are more commonly used or popular in the spaces that you occupy, is that that's a great way of um, almost getting yourself out there, um, either falling into the topic spaces that people may be searching. So think search engine optimization. So what are people engaging with? What are people looking for? If that's your goal, how will people more easily find me? And using hashtags that are popular in your spaces, in academic or research communities is an easy way to get yourself out there and um, kind of join the conversation there. One thing that people like to do as well is create their own hashtags. And in thinking about that, I definitely want to speak on how that takes a lot of thought, firstly, and it's important to think about what your goal is in creating your own hashtag. And the reason why I say that is if you create your own hashtag and nobody else is in the in of it and knows what the hashtag is, you'll find yourself being the only one using that hashtag. So, in creating your own hashtag, are you thinking of creating longevity? Are you creating a personal brand identity, professional brand identity that you hope people will pick up on? And if so, you have to go into a lot more work in having people pick up that hashtag. You can almost think about it as like um, a slang word, right? If you're the only one using a specific word or you've created your own word, odds are you're the only one who knows the definition for it. You're the only one who knows what context it's used in. And it takes a lot more work to get other people popping in on using that word and using it more habitually and keeping that at the front of mind. So that's on thinking about how we use hashtags, create hashtags, um, and how we can amplify our message through them. Another thing to keep in mind is who are you tagging in your social media posts? So it can be as little as tagging your collaborator in a post about the research you're working on, tagging an organization that either inspired work you're doing, funded work that you're doing, or that you hope your work can connect with. And the reason why we do that is because it's an opportunity to get to a wider audience. Because for the most part, when people are tagged in things, their first thing is, oh, checking what this content is. If it's valuable, they will repost it, they will comment upon it. And that really helps propel the message that you're sharing and really build your community beyond just what you may be, the networks that you have created so far. A few websites that are really valuable, and I'll actually share those in the chat, um, can really help offer insight into platform, into, I would rather say, trending tags, trending hashtags, looking at what's valuable within your spaces, your organizations. And the first one is hashtagify.me, and another is right tag. These can really help offer insights into trending tags. However, I think these are some that you can use if you're trying to get more technical and really get into the weeds of things. Um, so my first recommendation is looking at who people are hashtagging, who people are tagging within your community, whether it's community leaders, organizations, like what are people talking about and how can you leverage that to create your content and your posts. And still on the trend of amplifying your message, one thing that is really valuable for us to do as researchers, as academics, as scholars, is think about how we can leverage our community leaders. So this can be as simple as leaders in your organization, leaders in your community, to find new opportunities to grow your networks and build credibility. I included a screenshot here, actually, of a moment where a community leader in our context, so the University of Arizona context, um, where a post that we created um, actually led to an executive director of the Office of International Services reposting and almost reaffirming the work that we do. Um, and that in itself, it may be a small moment, but it helps build credibility, especially as such a new organization in the University of Arizona space. It builds credibility within our community as University of Arizona. So think about how you are engaging with community leaders, and not to say you have to work towards getting their attention, but just how to stay within their radar, whether it's tagging people, whether it's using specific tags, whether it's using specific hashtags as well, to kind of leverage the value that the community leaders in our spaces can have. And another thing is, um, a lot of us may already do this, whether it's in our personal context or even personal, professional context, but thinking about how we're engaging with our audiences. So, are we commenting on posts that may not be our own? Are we replying to comments to posts that we have made? Are we responding to DMs? Who are we sending messages to? And things like that. So that's something to keep in mind, as well as what feedback are we getting? Are we keeping in mind the feedback that we get in our posts, or are we looking at feedback that our peers get on specific posts that can help inform how we are going about creating our posts and things like that? Um, I actually wanted to share a little anecdote here and thinking about how you can um, use things like DMs here. I actually got my first job um, after graduating through sending a direct message to the vice chancellor of my university. And it was something so small as just being like, I would like to learn from you or to learn more about your journey. And that almost snowballed into getting my first job because I got on the radar of a community leader. And it wasn't a matter of, hi, I would like you to give me a job, but creating conversation and creating engagement, and fostering relationships that way. So it can be as small as just commenting on something, bringing something to light, or just acknowledging something that someone has said, um, to help bolster and build your community. All right, I'm keeping mind of time here, so I may skip over a few things, but I will make sure that everything that we're covering is still valuable. All right. So one thing that I wanted to touch on very briefly, I won't get into too much jargon or technicality about this, but something that undeniably all of us will have to think about or navigate, are algorithms, whether we know the technicalities of them, are into coding or any of those things. Algorithms, whether we use them or not, affect how our content, how our information gets out there. So things I want us to keep in mind, that aren't too in the weeds and nitty gritty is think about who you're following and what you're liking. What are you engaging with? What are you scrolling to? What are you searching for as yourself, as a user of social media platforms? Because all of these things can affect your audience and who your content is reaching. So beyond hashtags and um, tags as well, think about how you are engaging with social media platforms. One rule of thumb here would be potentially dividing your personal and your professional social media platforms to make sure that you're not, contaminating is the wrong word, but almost cross engaging, right? To make sure that you are fostering the specific environments that you want for your particular goals. So if your goal is to create more professional networks, to be seen by more professional organizations, consider how the social media that platform that you're using may influence that. I hear an unmute there. Is that all right? I'll continue. So think about how you are engaging with people, organizations on social media platforms, because that can really affect how your content gets to other people and who's seeing what you're sharing and things like that. And this is especially true for every single social media platform that is out there as well. Oh, that's all right. So, in keeping mind of time, I'd like us to take a moment to start thinking about who we're following, what you're liking, the networks that we're thinking about. Um, and we'd like to share a Google form um, with our general public here to give people the opportunity to share their social media handles with us, because this is a great way for you to create and cultivate your network beyond who you may know already. And this can come in the form of having corp follow you through our social media platforms, finding people through our following list, followers list as well, and creating engagement through that. And that link should be accessible to everyone in the chat now. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to go over there and fill that in. When you open it, it should look a little bit like this. So feel free to take a moment to fill that in um, and let us know where you are in platforms. Um, of course, if you don't have, feel free just to put not applicable in A for specific platforms. Ooh, not all of my resources are opening. That was just a little preview of our CARP social media page, actually. So it's almost a great segue. All right, so that should be accessible to all of us beyond just our time here. And we'll make sure that it is. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to speak on a few ethical considerations and challenges that we will all face as social media users, experts in social media spaces. Um, and one thing to note, particularly as coming in as experts in our fields, is that it's our responsibility to uphold the highest ethical standards in the information and the content we share, right? And of course, all of you already do that as researchers and making sure that the information you share, information that you create, is accurate. And that's doubly true for social media, particularly because it's very easy for people to disagree with your information. It's very easy for people to challenge what you say, what you post, because of the way that social media works. So that's really, really important. Another thing that I'll speak about is this privacy and sensitivity, and that could be a whole other webinar in itself. And thinking about how social media by design blurs the lines between public and private spheres. So just like I've spoken, thinking about um, how do you want to convey yourself, or how would you like to share the information that you have? Do you want to separate your private information from your public information? Think about how you're creating your social media profiles, the information that you're sharing, and how that is um, kind of navigated by the information you decide to share. Another big thing is thinking about how we can navigate things like misinformation. I included climate denialism here just because I know, especially for us, this side of the ocean, that's something really big in terms of how misinformation can spread like a wildfire on social media. And think about how we can navigate and negotiate that. As experts, it's not our job to go on every single post that may be spreading misinformation to challenge or disagree. But think about where you have opportunities to identify misinformation through the work that you already do, your expertise, and almost use that as a double um, moment to kind of amplify um, the work that you're doing and reassert your position as an expert. So, I want us to spend some time thinking about this question and answering this question. Um, how do you think you will use social media to enhance your research? Um, whether it's being informed by the content and information that I've shared now, or how you can kind of think about how you can go beyond what you've been doing now to enhance your research through social media. And if the long answer form doesn't work for anyone, feel free to just type it into the chat.
Thanks, Tamu. While people are taking some time to enter their answers, I just wanted to make us aware of the time and say that let's leave some time for questions and answers at the end. We already have one question in the chat from Unison. Um, and then once you wrap up, just a reminder to all the CARP scholars that if you could just stick around for a few minutes, we probably won't take a whole 30 minutes, but we just want to talk about a couple things with you, as well as introduce you to one of our new team members. Um, but while this poll is up, we encourage you to please write something. It doesn't have to be a long paragraph,
Mhm.
even if it's just a couple of words that say how you might use social media in future, and maybe you won't change the way you use it, but is there anything that you've taken from Tammy's webinar that, well, makes you think, oh, maybe I'll do something a bit different in future?
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Yunison, for the question. Oh, yeah, we have quite a few questions now. Okay, so the first question is there a downside to using these platforms to achieve the intended purpose? Um, I think with internet comes a lot of downsides, right? The deep dark web. One thing that comes to mind, particularly as experts, is that there is potential or the risk of dwelling too much on social media, like the sensationalism of social media or getting carried away with whether having posts go viral and things like that. That could potentially be a downside. And so that comes with obviously managing how we're using our social media, how much we're using our social media. I think one thing to always keep in mind is, especially for researchers, social media is supplemental. It is not the main be all and end all for getting our information out there and kind of building our credibility, but it's definitely a nice supplemental um, feature for using social media. I will say for using particular or specific platforms, I can speak on like one downside for each specifically. I think one downside for Twitter, and I spoke about it already, is that the limited text and the characters can almost distort messages, particularly if we don't really manipulate the way that we're um, phrasing what we want to share, just because we have to say it in so few words. But it's easy to kind of get over that by using things like threads and stuff like that. Um, And I think even with LinkedIn and Facebook, a lot of the times we forget that other people are also trying to do what we're doing. So that may be a downside. We may find ourselves connecting with people who may not have the right intentions, or I don't know, things like finding bots and stuff like that. So these are all things. There's multiple downsides, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity for using particular platforms. And I think my table with the checklist is a good rule of thumb for thinking about, okay, what are the benefits or the opportunities for these platforms? And not trying to use them for what aren't their particular strengths. I'll answer. Okay. Next question is, I would like to ask how to choose a platform for sharing research results to be well received, understood, and to be impactful by the public, especially in Africa. Oh, this is a really great question. I think to answer the first portion in thinking about how to choose the right platform for sharing research results, you can start firstly to think about what social media platforms do my immediate network use the most, right? Um, are most of the people within my field in my spaces on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook? um, Keeping that in mind can help think, okay, if my network or the people that I know within these spaces are on these platforms, if they see my posts and repost and share them, I can be sure that their networks will see that as well. And one thing as well in terms of sharing results is think about how you are conveying that information. So whether you decide to create an infographic, whether you decide to thank you. Whether you decide to share images or like hone in on specific results, the one thing to keep in mind is how well can I convey that and which platform will give me that opportunity. So, if I want to share a full document, LinkedIn. If I can share a visual very briefly and quickly, Twitter is a great place. Um, if I'm trying to get to specific communities that I may already be connected to, maybe Facebook. Um, so those are all things to keep in mind. And I think we'll be able to share these slides as well, which will be a good rule of thumb for just thinking about how we're going about that. I hope that answers that question. All right. I will end our poll now and see if I can actually share results. I think they may be sharing with you all. I cannot see what it looks like on our end, but we'll definitely keep stock of what people have responded and think about how we can better support and share resources, keeping in mind what people have put in the responses. All right. And before we end, just circling back to our focus on Twitter and LinkedIn, we've included a few screenshots of our CARP social media platforms. Um, and what we are capitalizing or focusing on at the moment. Obviously, these are not the exhaustive platforms, but they are where we are spending our time and thinking about investing in, mainly because A, LinkedIn is a great place to build networks, and Twitter is a great way to join specific conversations, narratives, and things like that. So if anyone has not followed the cart page, feel free to join us here. And we also have the Google form as well that we will use to stay connected with you all and make sure that we are keeping in touch and learning from each other. We've skipped over to the questions section already, so we can move on to our little section, very brief, very quickly, for our COP scholars. And the main thing that we wanted to
Tell
discuss
me,
with,
let's just pause there quickly before
okay,
we go into that. And yeah, if we're switching over to the section of the webinar that's relevant to CARP scholars, we can just say a big thank you to all of our guests who joined us today. If you want to stay and listen, you can, but this next portion, we are talking specifically to CARP scholars. But also, yeah, so thank you to all of you for joining, and also thank you to Tamu for an interesting talk and engaging webinar. I just wanted to reiterate some of the messages she shared. You know, at the beginning of Tammy's talk, she told us about how social media can amplify your research, and one of the statistics that I picked up there was that in some cases, people are seeing up to 70% more citations of their work when they're sharing it via social media. And I think that alone is a great reason to use social media platforms like X, LinkedIn, and others to share the work that we're doing, especially if you have a publication that you would like to share and that you want people to cite, sharing it on social media is a really good idea. Tammy also spoke about how different social media platforms can do different things for us. And Aina's question in the chat, asked about how do we choose this platform? So Tammy gave us a little bit of insight into that, and talked about how different platforms are good for different things. Thinking specifically about X, it's much shorter messages, whereas something like LinkedIn, you have a lot more space to write. And it also just depends on what the people around you in your community are using. And that includes both your personal and your professional communities. Of course, the quality of the content that we're sharing is important. So it's not just about sharing anything, but how can we use our words, different types of visuals to make the content more engaging, as well as language. So how can we use relatable language to make our content accessible to the specific audience that we're targeting? Another thing that I thought was interesting in your webinar, Tamu, was your mention of algorithms. I think when we're using social media, we aren't always aware that algorithms are working in the background, but it is something to remember that algorithms do affect how our content is seen, how it's used and perceived by others who are using social media. So think about this when we're making posts and engaging with other people's posts. So for example, if you're liking or commenting on a lot of political content, that's the type of thing you're going to see. Whereas if you want to use your social media more for research purposes, you can engage more with other social media accounts from people in your field, from other academics or development agencies, that kind of thing. And then your algorithm will tailor what you see on your social media page to that. And there were many other things that Tammy talked about, but we'll leave it there for today. So once again, thank you, everyone. And if we can just ask the CARP scholars to stick around for a few minutes while we discuss a couple of things. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to everyone. I feel like I could probably speak about this for hours and hours, so I tried my best to make it as brief as possible. But if anyone ever has any questions beyond this, we're always happy to answer and really get into more specific details for each and every one of us. All right. Julia, should I go on ahead and continue?
Yes, let's go ahead.
All right. Okay. Okay. So we're taking this moment to kind of circle back to something that we've already shared and a few resources that we've already kind of sent over via email. But the first thing is that we're sharing another Google form specifically for us as CARP scholars here in this space that we would like you all to fill, and it is in the chat right now. I'll open it up so we all see what it's supposed to look like.
Can you talk a little bit louder, Tamu?
Oh, sorry. I
Thanks.
keep, I, my brain is like it's 7 a.m. in the morning, so I'm not trying to wake anyone up. All right, so here is a Google form that allows you to request that your posts be shared on our social media chat channels. Um, and we require you just to share your name, institution, project details, along with a brief summary of the post. And it also gives you an opportunity to share images as well. Um, and this is a great way for us to keep in mind, or at least to create a database for scheduling posts and making sure we're highlighting the research that you're doing. We'll share a few examples of a few posts that we've done so far for COP scholars. And actually, the example that I showed of the community leader, or rather the director at the UFA reposting, was a post about a CARP scholar. Um, so just keeping in mind where your content can go, or where a sharing about what progress you're doing with a specific project or research can go. So please keep this in mind. If you can even think of something that you'd like to share with us right now, please do so. This Google form is a really great resource just because it's pretty brief. We don't expect too much written form or anything like that. But it's an easy way for you to keep us in the loop and have us make sure that we're keeping in mind amplifying your work. And of course, we also do that by, I'm sure many of you have already had us message you asking for your tag and making sure we have your profiles and things like that so that when we're sharing information, we can connect back to you and make sure that our networks are seeing you and you're being rightfully credited for the work that you're doing. And here are just a few examples of some posts that we've done so far. And so this is generally our format. So whether you create a blog post, whether we're just sharing your research project, having your tags, having the links to that information, having images that you'd like us to share, um, is that's the purpose of that Google form. So keep that in mind, whether you have something to share right now or we'll be sharing later, save that. We'll make sure to be sharing that with you as well. More constantly, so that you just have that in mind. So whenever you want to share information, um, please feel free to use that. Would you like me to go into a little bit about the Google Drive folder as well?
Let's show it just very briefly.
All right.
Um, if you guys all remember, I sent a while ago via email a link to a Google Drive folder where we can all upload images and relevant publications, and also share skills that we have that we're willing to, help other CARP scholars with, and also say what we might need. And this Google Drive folder was one of the things that people expressed interest in when we had our in-person workshop in Tanzania last year. And so we just wanted to let you know again that we did follow up on that and that this Google Drive folder is available. Um, I can, if I just give me a second, I can post the link.
I have the link to the community exchange sheet here. You have the folder.
I wonder if that link will work. But this is something, if you are interested in, you know, it is very useful and it's a good way for us to keep our community aspect going and make sure that we are sharing content with each other so that all of the COP scholars can see what we're working on. Some things that are in the folder right now are all the posters from the workshop in Tanzania. So if you want to remind yourself what other people's projects are about and read a bit more about them, you can go and see that. You can share literature that you found is useful. You can share photos and media, that sort of thing. And yeah, I think we won't dwell too much on that, just because we're out of time already. But I just wanted to remind you all that this Google Drive folder is here. It's for you to use. So please do use it. Tammy, can you just quickly go into the that Excel sheet?
Yes.
Just open that up. So Corey and I filled out our information here just as an example. But we encourage all of you to go into this Google Sheets, fill out your information. And the point of this was to be sort of a directory of all of our scholars. And here you can see we have, whoops, slow down on the scrolling.
Okay.
Can you go back a little bit? Yeah, so there's two, stop, column G and H.
All right.
So here we have columns, one for topics on that you might need assistance with on your COP project. And this is very useful because it lets us know what you need help with, and maybe we could find webinar speakers, or we can connect you with people either within the COP community or here in Arizona or in Stellenbosch, who can assist you with the things that you need. And then we also have a column for topics that you can assist other COP scholars with. So for example, Kari and I can both help with things like survey design. Kari's also great at things around sampling, data analysis, writing for a scientific audience. You know, I could help with things like writing and editing and specific topics that I'm familiar with. And yeah, so this is just an example of how we can use this form to make sure that we're all helping each other in this COP community, and that, you know, uh, we're saying what we need help with as well, which I think is really important. We've also put columns here for you to give us your WhatsApp number. I think we have many of your WhatsApp numbers if you're already on the group. This is another place where you can put in your X handle and your LinkedIn profile if you want to. Of course, there's also the Google form that we shared earlier. Okay, I think that's good. Kari, did you want to add anything about this Google Drive?
No, thank you, Julia. I think you covered it.
Okay. Yeah, we just wanted to make you all aware that this is available, so please use it. Okay, so given that we're out of time, I think we'll wrap up. But one last thing that is important to do is for us to introduce you to a new team member that we have here in Arizona. Dr. Marielle Abalo has joined us recently, and I'll let her introduce herself. Yeah, I won't say any more. Marielle, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. I appreciate that. And thank you, Tamu, for the presentation. I think it went really well. So I'm glad this was my first webinar. And hello, everyone. My name is Marielle Lavalo. And as Julia just said, I am the newest member of the CARP team. I have a background in climate science with the focus on using animal species as indicators of climate change. And I have experience working in Latin America and throughout the African diaspora. So I also speak French. So I gather there's a few of you that speak French here. So I am happy to be a resource and communicate with you as you need. Spanish and Portuguese as well, if that's something that's needed from any of you scholars. And my title is the Research Program Officer for CARP. So I will be in touch with you. I will be at the conference as well in Ethiopia. So I look forward to meeting you all at that time. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to meet everyone today.
Thanks so much, Marielle. We're happy to have you on the team. I think Marielle will be a really good resource for you guys going forward. I think many of you know, or at least those who I saw in Tanzania last year, that I'm going to be going on leave soon to have a baby, which is very exciting. But it means that I unfortunately won't be in Ethiopia, and I won't be on email pretty much for a couple of months. So if there is anything that you need, you can continue reaching out to Kari and the rest of the team as you always have. But Marielle is also a new team member and a great resource, you know, for you to have if you need help with anything. And both Marielle and Temutswa, and also Sonia, I'm not sure if Sonia has met everyone. I think you've met some people, Sonia, but they will all be in Ethiopia. And so those of you who are going, you'll meet them in person there. Okay, so I think that's all we wanted to cover. It's a little bit rushed at the end, but I think it was important to spend more time talking about social media and the importance of that. And we do encourage you to please fill out your information. And with that, we'll wrap it up and hope you all have a great evening. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and as always, we will be sharing the recording as well as the presentation slides, and we can share the results of the polls as well with you within the next week or so.